It's time for another episode of Gospel Preaching Live, brought to you by the Kearney Church of Christ, which meets at 406 North Clark in Kearney, Missouri. Make plans to come out and visit the brethren, who look forward to seeing you. And now the host of Gospel Preaching Live, Richard Dodson.
Okay, welcome to Gospel Preaching Live, where we're going to try to bring a lesson to you every Sunday evening and Thursday evening. And this week, this episode is a Sunday evening episode. I trust you've had a good day. If you have any questions about the show, or if you have any remarks otherwise, you can call or text 816-686-9517. That's 816-686-9517. If you like to email me, you may at gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com. That's gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com. If you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, go ahead and like us, subscribe to it, and you can also leave comments in the comment section, and I'll try to address that as best I can. Otherwise, I'm glad that you're going to uh, take advantage of the lesson this evening. Hopefully, you'll find it to be edifying. All right, tonight's lesson, and we're going to talk about my favorite Proverbs. And there's a bunch of them. There's no way I could preach one lesson on my favorite Proverbs. So from time to time, I may address some more. But these are some that I want to talk about tonight. And hopefully, I will open your eyes to the book of Proverbs and will encourage you to look at them yourself. It's a fascinating book. Not just a book of Proverbs, a book of Ecclesiastes also. All the wisdom books hold truths, hold proverbs. And it's something that we can learn from. And so for this evening, we're going to look at a few of my favorite. Before we do that, if someone came up to you and asked you what a proverb is, how would you define it? Well, basically, we're talking about a maxim. It's something like too many cooks in the kitchen spoil the broth. Those types of short answers that are packed with general truths that you can apply in different situations, and people use those maxims for whatever purpose they may have at the specific time. My mom used to quote them to me all the time when I was growing up. The difference being with the proverbs that are found in the Old Testament is that they are inspired. They are true, and there is, of course, some research to look at these because, again, they are generally truths, but there are, if you study it, you can find some more detail, as we're going to see evidence of in tonight's lesson. Uh, when we're talking about how it's quoted in the New Testament, it's either a direct quote or there'll be an allusion to it that you can look at and you can see that for yourselves. The Apostle Paul does it many times. Other writers do it as well. But if you look, for instance, in Proverbs chapter 25 and verses 21 through 22, the, the proverb reads, "If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you." Now, notice what Paul said when he quotes this in Romans 12:20. He said, "To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink, for by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head." See, that's a quote. And so that tells you then, since he is quoting it has to be inspired. Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 31, it says, "If the righteous is repaid on earth, how much more the wicked and the sinner?" And then Peter says, if the righteous is scarcely saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? He's definitely making allusion back to that proverb in Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 31. One more, just for good measure. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 20. "Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins." Now the allusion is referred to in Romans 3:10 by Paul. "None is righteous, no, not one." Now, of course, there's other passages in the Old Testament that also teach this, but I'm only using this to show that sometimes it's quoted directly, and sometimes people in the New Testament alluded to it. Needless to say, it's a teaching that was reiterated by many of those in the New Testament. So, should we study them? Absolutely, we should study them. They're just so rich. So we want to make sure that we take advantage of the bounty that's before us, because there's many things, especially the young, need to look at and study to help them as they go through life. So let's go ahead and jump into the lesson this evening. Uh, let's look at first one, Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 21. One of my favorites. It says, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." So, in other words, the Lord's going to have his way. Now, you may think something's going to go all kinds of different ways because men change their mind. I mean, we are constantly changing our minds, but it doesn't really matter what we purpose when the Lord has already decided something, that this is the way it's going to be. That's going to stand. And that's why we always need to be careful about being presumptuous with our own plans. Because again, we keep coming up with things based on our limited vision, where God knows everything and God makes plans based upon how he wants to use you. That's his whole, that's he's God. We're not. And so if he wants to use you in a certain way, that's he has that right to do so. And so we got some passages that reiterate this. This is one showing the purpose of God and how it stands. Isaiah 55 and 11. When the Lord said about his word, "So shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I propose, which I purpose, I'm sorry, and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it." Well, that's the Lord. He's made a plan for this word, and it's going to stand. And you can read this and you can write it down in stone. This is going to be done. It's going to go throughout the whole world. It's going to get taught, and those who wish to be saved will be saved by that word. They're going to hear it and they're going to find out what they need to do to be acceptable to God. That's what's going to take place. That's what the Lord has already decided it. So that's what's going to stand. And James chapter 4, verse 13 through 16, we have an example of man being scatterbrained. He's just making plans all over the place. And he needs to be including God in this because, again, God's purpose stands. He says, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil." Well, that's true. When we don't include man in our God in our plans, then we're boasting. We're thinking that, yeah, we're actually whittling on his end of the stick. Remember, it's the Lord's plan that stands. And so we should be saying, well, if the Lord wills. So when we're talking about whatever it is we're going to do in the future, you should always say, if the Lord wills. That shows the person you're talking to, and it shows the Lord that you realize the Lord's will is what's going to stand, and that you have to succumb to that. Now, there's nothing wrong with making plans, but like I said, man makes plans and he changes plans. When God makes a plan, he's made it and it stands. And so we need to make sure that when we're thinking about the things that we may want to do in the future, we include God in that decision. Always go to the Lord and ask, say, "Lord, this is what I want to do. Um, Help me with this if it's according, if you are granting it, if it's something you're pleased with." And you know, that's just part of being a servant. We have to go to the Father to get permission, and so we need to go to Him and say, if the Lord wills, I'll do this. And that doesn't. It's not a bad thing to make plans. The Lord wants us to make such plans. But again, what goes wrong is when we start making plans without consulting God to make sure that our plans are not conflicting with one another. Now, There's a good example of this in Luke chapter 12 and verse 16 through 20. It's a parable of a rich man. And this is a story, if you remember, he had a lot of things, and he decided he's going to build himself barns. It says the land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my gain and my goods, all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God said, fool, this night your soul is required of you. The things you have prepared, whose will they be? And it goes on to talks about, producing fruit, how we need to be busy producing fruit. This man made plans that it appears that he was thinking he was going to be on earth for a while. And so he was going to work toward, instead of producing fruit for heaven, he was going to produce the fruit for himself on this earth. And so when he's thinking, I'm just going to relax and enjoy life, the Lord, whose plan stands, mind you, said, no, this is the night that your soul's going to be required. And so all those things he worked for, he was busy working for somebody else, because somebody else was going to get those things, which goes to show you that even the Bible says you can't take it with you. The only thing that you can take with you is your heavenly fruit, which he should have been busy producing. And so this is a good passage to show we need to be focused on what God wants and remember that God's plan is going to stand. And our plans can be all over the map. But if we include the Lord first and foremost, put him first in our life, then when he does say that it's time for you to leave this earth, well, you're going to be ready because you realized his plan stands and your plan does not. And you've done everything to be in accordance with that, where this poor man didn't. And so it was a foolish bet on himself, and we got to make sure we don't do the same thing. Jeremiah 10:23, it's a good passage. Oh Lord, I know the way of man is not in himself, it's not in man that walketh to direct his steps. And it's not. It's not in man that walks to direct his steps. We have to look to God and again realize his plan stands. And so he may want us to go a different route. Um, Jesus, when he was in the garden, what did he pray for? Lord, if it be thy will, let this cup pass from me. He prayed that 3 times. And finally, it became apparent that the Lord's will was for that he was going to have to partake in this. And he was willing and he was ready. But the thing is, he wasn't boasting, he wasn't arrogant. He went to the Father and said, if it be thy will. He really didn't want to have to do this, but he was going to do what he had to do to be pleasing to God. The Lord directs our steps, and we need to acknowledge him and all the things that we plan and think. We need to acknowledge the Lord so that we are not being so boastful or arrogant. Again, all men can make plans, but it's only the plan of the Lord that's going to stand. All right, that's the first proverb that I enjoyed. Here's another one. And this is one that I tell my son all the time. Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 20. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Isn't that something? And then what it's saying is if you surround yourself with smart people, you can't help but be smart. But if you surround yourself with foolish people, then you're going to be foolish and you're going to be hurt because that foolishness is going to spread to you. And I got some passages that go along with this, and I hope this is something that we can learn and take to heart. This is one that so many people quote, 1 Corinthians 15:33. Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. And so we need to make sure we don't surround ourselves with fools. We want to surround ourselves with smart people. Bad company ruins good morals. So you don't want to be running around with people who are engaged in sin. Because if you're trying to live sinless, if you're trying to overcome temptation, then why would you want to surround yourself with people who are giving into that temptation? You want to surround yourself with people who can overcome that particular temptation, or who are working toward it, who want to do it, and that you can learn from them and help them, and they can help you. Uh, that's just common sense, I would think. But the thing is, the scriptures back that up. In Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 24 and 25, it's a passage you've probably heard your preacher probably used it today at church. Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Now, why do we do that? Because the wise people are they're seeking to please God. And so you want to be with them. You want to assemble with them. You don't want to skip that. Remember, whoever's with the wise is going to be wise. And you can't find wiser people than Christians. I think Romans 6 bears that out. Yeah, we make judges and we deem judges to be very wise and settling disputes of this world. But Paul said in Romans chapter 6, he's telling brethren, don't you go before an unrighteous judge. You be better off taking this matter to whoever's least esteemed in the church. And why is that? Because Christians are constantly being trained in the ways of God. Christians are being trained in what God believes is right from wrong. And so that makes them wise. They're working to overcome temptation, they're working to learn God's will. And you can't say that about some of the smartest people on this planet. The world calls them wise, but God calls them fools. Why? Because they're ignoring Him. So if you want to be wise, then be with the wise. And who do the wise learn from? They learn from God. And that's why you should always want to go to church, because whoever's with the wise is going to become wise. I was raised by parents who are Christians. Many of the things that are still with me today are the things that my parents taught me and the things I learned because they took me to church, the things I learned in Bible classes. You know, it keeps happening too. Even as an adult, I can think back of lessons I've heard preachers preach, of Bible classes I've been in, and I became wiser for doing this. I've shared experiences with my brethren. I've listened to their experiences, and I learned from them. That's wisdom. I was with the wise, and that helped me become wise, and that can help you as well. In 1 Kings 12, verse 6 through 11, we won't read this. I will blow it up on the screen for you so you can read it if you want. But King Rehoboam was Solomon's son, and he had the chance to unite the kingdom, Judah and Israel, back together. But Jeroboam came to him and said, if you want to get united, if you want us to serve you, then you're going to have to promise to treat us well. And so Rehoboam went, and what did he do? He got together the council that his father had, the older men, and he put this before them. He said, "What should I do?" And they said, "Look, if you want the people to serve you forever, then treat them nice, be good to them." And then he decided to gather the boys he grew up with, the young men, and he put this before them. And what did they say? "Oh, no, no, no! You're not going to do this." He said, your father. Tell him this: your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. Oh, then he says, "My little finger is thicker than my father's thighs." And he says, "Now, whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips. He says, I will discipline you with scorpions." Well, guess whose advice he took? The foolish advice, those young men that he grew up with. And he did not unite the kingdom. And because he took this advice, he was at war all the days of his life. So we can see then that we need to be surrounding ourselves with smart people. It's going to help us in the future. And here's another one. And this one is one that if you do a little digging, you can learn things other than the general truth that's taught here. Excuse my cough. Proverbs chapter 30, verse 8 and 9. Remove far from me falsehood and lying. This is from King Edgar. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you, and say, who is Lord? And lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. You know, I used to read this along with what Jesus taught in the New Testament about how it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. Of course, that's a camel coming through the gate of the city. But I used to think, well, it must be wrong to be rich. But yet I knew there was plenty of my brethren who were rich and they seemed like really good people. And then I started to remember the rest of the teaching. The rest of the teaching states that the disciples came to Jesus and said, well, then who can be saved? And Jesus said, well, with men, you know, this is not possible, but with God, all things are possible, leading me to wonder what he meant by that. Now, I want you to notice that in the Bible, it does command Christians not to be covetous. And he says in verse 13 and verse 5 of Hebrews, keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. Be content. That's what the Lord's looking for. Be content with what you have. Even though some people may have more and you have less, he said, be content. In Colossians chapter 3 and verse 5, we are to put to death covetousness. We are not supposed to be coveting after having more things. That's something that Christians are to put to death. Then in Philippians chapter 4 and 11 through 13, and this is what's telling. He said, Paul said, I am not that I'm speaking in need of want, verse 11, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low. I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Now, obviously, there was times Paul was doing pretty good, and there was other times he wasn't doing so good. Well, it appears to me that that proverb is a general truth, that it's very possible the Lord may want some Christians to have money, and he expects them to be able to handle the temptations that come along with it. That perhaps they have a responsibility that they need to share that money and do good things with that money and not to be covetous and trust in it. And perhaps that's very possible because it appears that that's what Paul says. He says, I had learned uh, to live both ways. I can be content with whatever I have. And so, is it possible then that the Lord has given some money to certain Christians in order for them to be able to glorify the Father? Well, I think so. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17 through 19, it says, as for the rich in this present age, Paul tells Timothy, charge them not to be haughty, not to set their hopes on uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. So they can do the same thing. A poor man can learn how to do without because he doesn't have anything. But can a rich man learn to abound? Yes, he can. And he needs to focus on this command that the Lord gives, and that is that not to put their trust in money and to be using that blessing that the Lord had uh, to be rich in good works. Now, they can enjoy that money. It makes it very clear. God provides us with everything to enjoy. And so, can they use that money to enjoy it? Yes. But then it says to share it, be generous, ready to share. and never, ever trusting in money, because there may become a time they may have to give that up, and then they're going to be suffering need. But it's the Lord they put their trust in, and they're not going to have any trouble with that. Now, if you go to the early part of Acts, we'll find that men were selling all that they had and laying it at the apostles' feet. That means there was some poor man who was giving what he had, which wasn't much, but he was putting it at the apostles' feet, and that there were rich men who were making themselves poor and putting it at the apostles' feet. Think about that. They didn't have a problem with it because they were putting their faith in God instead of riches. And men can learn to do that. You can learn, as Paul did, you can learn how to suffer need as well as to enjoy the riches that God may bless you with. Either way, you can't think that you're better than somebody because the Lord gives you riches. You have to realize it's a blessing from God and that you have responsibilities that way. Okay. I'll leave you with one more proverb, and it'll be our closing verse. Proverbs chapter 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. That's what Proverbs help us do. We learn about God. We learn these truths. We learn deeper about these things by going into the Bible, and we trust in God. And we don't lean on our own understanding. Why? Because we're just mere men. We need to be trained in righteousness. I hope this lesson will encourage you to pick up the book of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and look for these truths and to study them. Don't take them on just what it states. Look into other scriptures. See how those other scriptures back up that are enlightened that proverb even more. Okay, that's all I got for you this evening. Remember, if you're ever in the Kearney, Missouri area, come and worship with us. We meet at 9:30 Sunday morning for Bible study, 10:30 for worship. We meet at 406 North Clark. You can learn more about us by going to www.kearneychurch.com. And you can also hear a gospel lesson. If you like this one, you can hear others as well. If you're in the Kearney area every Sunday morning at 7 o'clock, turn to your radio stations, the KPGZ 102.7 FM, and you'll hear a lesson from God's Word. If you're outside the Kearney area, you can stream this on your mobile device. Every Thursday at 10 o'clock, Berean Spirits is on our Facebook and YouTube channels, as well as the Berean Spirits YouTube channel. It's a live Bible study between me and three other preachers, and we try to study as the Bereans did in Acts 17. If you're watching on Facebook and YouTube, we invite you to take part by making comments in the comment section and or ask questions or whatever it might be. We try to include those in the study. And again, you can go to kearneychurch.com to find the Facebook and YouTube channels. It is also left up online, so even though if you don't catch it live, you can go and watch the replay of it. So, okay, that's all I have for you this evening. Our next lesson, Lord willing, will be this Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Time. Until then, remember, this is the day the Lord has made. Let's rejoice in it and be glad.
This has been Gospel Preaching Live. Join us each week as truth is taught, faith is examined, and beliefs are challenged. Be sure and hit the like button so you can be notified of future episodes. And to watch past episodes, go to our website, kearneychurch.com. This has been a work of the Kearney Church of Christ.